Hello there, GB here, and welcome to Fast Forward, where I follow up on episodes of Rewind Classic Movies to look at what happened after those iconic films came out. Today we're diving back into the spectacular, spectacled Man of Steel that is Superman. We'll look at everything from sequels and video games to a very culturally different Superman I can't believe happened, and a direct sequel to Superman 2 that isn't Superman 3. So let's pretend the world isn't collapsing, slick back our hair and slip on some very colourful overpants as we fast forward to ask what happened after 1978's Superman the movie. Superman 2. After the success of Superman, there were some huge changes for the sequel. They'd been filming 1 and 2 at the same time under director Richard Donner, who had clashed with producers over creative control, tone, budget, and his insistence on a serious, respectful approach to the material. Richard Lester, who had directed the Beatles' Hard Day's Night, was brought in as an intermediary between them, and also as second unit director. Donner had shot about 3/4 of the sequel, but was fired by the producers before filming was complete. So Lester took over and ended up reshooting scenes that were already done just so he could get a director's credit. It had knock-on effects too, with creative consultant Tom Mankiewicz, editor Stuart Baird and Gene Hackman refusing to return to complete Superman 2. They ended up hiring a body double and a voice impersonator for Lex Luthor.
Hey, never heard of parachutes?
Marlon Brando. But there was another big name missing, Marlon Brando, Superman's dad. Just 2 days after Superman flew into cinemas, Brando sued the producers for $50 million. He claimed they never paid him for his agreed percentage for the film's gross takings at the box office. He also filed for a restraining order, stopping them from using his likeness in the sequel. He didn't get it, but he did get $15 million. And the producers decided to not include him in Superman 2 to avoid having to pay him any more money, reportedly a further 11% of the follow-up's box office takings. Brando's footage was ditched and Kal-El's mother Lara did the talking instead. But it would resurface over 25 years later, which I'll come on to later. Superman Lives. I'm going to fast forward past the Richard Pryor-focused Superman 3, directed by Richard Lester, past 1984's attempt at Supergirl, past the universally panned budget Superman 4, which had story contributions from Christopher Reeve, and to the mid-90s, and to the most infamous Superman movie that never got made, Superman Lives. Warner Brothers was desperate to revive the Man of Steel after the Reeve era fizzled out, so they brought in Batman's Tim Burton to direct, cast Nicolas Cage, yes, Nicolas Cage, and then handed the script to Kevin Smith and eventually Andor's Dan Gilroy, and wanted Courtney Cox, Sandra Bullock, Julia Roberts, Cameron Diaz, Gwyneth Paltrow, or Elizabeth Shue, to star as Lois Lane. What could possibly go wrong? Turns out, everything. Producer John Peters demanded Superman not fly like normal, not wear the classic suit, and then at one point fight a giant spider. They spent $30 million on developing it, which included some incredibly inventive suit designs, before Warner Brothers pulled the plug in '98. CGI Cage would eventually pop up as a cameo in The Flash in 2023. If you want to find out more about this movie, then watch The Death of Superman Lives by the late John Schnepp. Oh, and John Peters would eventually have the giant spider idea crawl into Wild Wild West with Will Smith. And I didn't even mention the names they were considering for Jimmy Olsen. Paul Rudd and Matthew Perry were on the white list, while there was a much shorter list of actors if they went with a black Jimmy Olsen. On that was Chris Rock and Marlon Wayans. And Burton wanted Christopher Walken as the big bad brainiac. Josh Hartnett. Now let's fast forward to the early 2000s to an attempt to make a movie called Superman Flyby. There's a script by a young J.J. Abrams, and the studio had their eye on one actor, Josh Hartnett. He was offered the cape to not just one movie, but the trilogy worth a rumoured $100 million. But Hartnett said no, concerned about being locked into the Man of Steel for a decade. Brandon Routh would eventually don the cape in Superman Returns in 2006. And if you're thinking Hartnett was a crazy choice, it wasn't just the Superman franchise he rejected. He also said no to Nolan's Batman reboot, and even the James Bond role that went to Daniel Craig. The Donner Cut. It wasn't until Superman 2, the Richard Donner Cut, was released in 2006 that fans finally saw Marlon Brando's original scenes restored to the sequel. The movie is more serious and matches the tone of the first film, but contained unfinished effects, screen tests, and patchwork editing because of missing footage. It's an interesting watch if you're a hardcore fan. And I also want to mention the extended edition of the first movie, which I almost watched by accident for the main Rewind show. It's over 3 hours long, and there's a final scene which is a nice addition where we see Lex playing piano with an upset Otis. And it's revealed that Otis has Miss Tessmacher, tied to a rope and seemingly torturing her before Lex gives the command to lower her into a pit of screeching animals. As he does so, Superman flies in and saves her, and that leads into the shot in the theatrical release of our hero flying into the prison with the villains. Pop culture. Superman has had some interesting effects on pop culture, and I'm just going to quickly mention a few things. Yes, there's been loads of Superman on TV, including multiple series featuring the Man of Steel, but it was also lead to shows like The Boys, Heroes, and popped up throughout Seinfeld and The Simpsons. Then there's music. The original Reeve film inspired the Kinks' 1979 song, open brackets, Wish I Could Fly Like, close brackets, Superman, when the band's main songwriter, Ray Davies, watched the film in late 78, and there's been no shortage of others from Three Doors Down, Eminem, and Five for Fighting. Then there's comedy. Monty Python once crossed paths with Superman in the classic sketch where supermen are everywhere, but they really all just admire this one superhero called Bicycle Repairman. Like most Python comedy, it sounds ridiculous, not that funny, on paper, but AJ loves it. Now imagine if Monty Python wrote a Superman story. Well, you don't have to, because in 2004, John Cleese co-wrote an actual DC comic with a twist. It saw Superman landing in the UK and raised as Colin Clark, where he uses his superpower to milk cows really fast and heat tea with his laser vision. There's plenty of video games too, some better than others, but none really good. I remember Superman on the Mega Drive in '92, where you couldn't even fly. And in games where you can fly, you usually just do it mindlessly and endlessly. But for the worst, check out Superman 64. In terms of comics, of course, there's loads, but the one I want to mention is from 2021, when DC Comics revived the continuity of the Reeve films with the Superman 78 comic book series, emulating the look of those movies. The series picks up where the first two films left off, acting as a direct sequel. And finally, Indian Superman. Imagine if Kal-El landed in India and the original movie was made in the 80s on a ridiculously low budget and made into a Bollywood movie. Well, in 1987 that happened, and let's just say the movie borrowed heavily from the 78 Reeve movie. I don't know how they got away with it. Anyway, join me and AJ next week for the main Rewind show, as we'll be going to 1993 to talk about a film where a lawyer gets his head bitten off while on the toilet. I cannot wait. Sorry about the mess. See you next time.